July 1956, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Frontier Days. The biggest outdoor rodeo in the world. 10 days every July. 80,000 people through the gates. The smell of dust and livestock and fried food and leather from one end of the fairgrounds to the other. In the back pens behind the main arena, away from the crowds and the noise, a man named Clyde Rudd is leading a bay gelding down a narrow dirt alley between the stock pens toward the far gate. The horse is 17 years old. He has a bowed tendon in his left foreleg and a limp that has gotten worse over the past 3 days. The man at the far gate has a county veterinarian's authorization and a bolt gun. It is 6:30 in the morning, and the crowds have not arrived yet. At the end of the alley, leaning against the fence rail with a cup of coffee, a man in a tan Stetson and a canvas jacket watches Clyde come down the alley with the horse. Nobody recognizes him yet. Here is the story. The horse's name was Captain. He had been a rodeo horse for 11 years, working the Frontier Days circuit and the Pendleton Roundup and the Calgary Stampede and a dozen smaller shows across Wyoming and Montana and Colorado. He was a bay gelding, 16 hands, with a white blaze down his face and 3 white stockings, and a disposition that the men who worked with him described the same way every time. Honest. An honest horse. He did what you asked, and he did not waste energy on things that were not asked of him, and he had never, in 11 years of rodeo work, put a rider in a bad position on purpose. He had belonged to a stock contractor named Walt Briggs since 1947. Walt had bought him as a 6-year-old from a ranch outside Laramie for $200 and had worked him through the circuit ever since. Walt Briggs is 58 years old, a wide, flat-faced man with a gray mustache and hands the size of dinner plates from 40 years of stock work. He has owned and sold and lost and bought more horses than he can count. He is not a sentimental man about livestock. He will tell you that himself if you ask him. He told himself the same thing on the morning of July 17, 1956, when the veterinarian looked at Captain's left foreleg and wrote the authorization, and Walt signed it without looking at the horse's face. The bowed tendon had been coming for 2 seasons. A bowed tendon in a working rodeo horse is a slow sentence. The horse compensates, shifts weight, works other joints harder, and the compensation creates new problems. By the summer of 1956, Captain was compensating badly. His left shoulder had gone tight. His gait had changed. He had dropped weight through June despite eating well. The veterinarian in Cheyenne looked at him for 20 minutes, and then looked at Walt and said what Walt already knew. Walt signed the authorization at 5 in the morning. He went back to the stock trailer and drank 2 cups of coffee and did not go back to look at Captain again. He sent Clyde Rudd to handle the rest of it. Clyde has worked for Walt for 9 years. He is 34 years old, lean and quiet, the kind of man who does difficult things without making them into occasions. He haltered Captain at 6:15 and led him out of the pen and down the narrow dirt alley toward the far gate. Captain walked the alley the way he had walked every alley in every rodeo in 11 years. Steady, unhurried, trusting the man on the lead rope the way honest horses trust the people they have worked with. He did not know where the alley went. He had been down 100 alleys. At the end of the alley, the man in the tan Stetson was leaning against the fence rail. He had been there for 10 minutes. He had come around the back of the pens early, the way he always came to rodeos, through the back rather than the front, because the back was where the real work happened, and the real work was what interested him. He had been watching Captain come down the alley since Clyde turned the corner with him. He set his coffee cup on the fence rail. Clyde. Clyde Rudd stopped. He looked at the man on the fence. Something moved across his face. "Sir, where's that horse going?" Clyde looked at Captain, then at the man at the gate ahead of them with the veterinarian's bag, then back at the man in the Stetson. "County authorization, sir. Tendon's gone." The man in the Stetson came off the fence rail. He walked to Captain and put his hand on the horse's neck, flat, still, the way a man touches a horse he wants to read. Captain turned his head and looked at him. The blaze on his face was white and clean in the early morning light. "How old?" 17. The man ran his hand down Captain's neck to his shoulder. He crouched and looked at the left foreleg. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. "Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches." He stood up. He looked at Clyde. "Who owns him?" "Walt Briggs. He's in the contractor's lot." The man looked at Captain one more time. Then he looked at the man at the gate with the veterinarian's bag. Then he looked at Clyde. "Don't move him. I'll be back in 10 minutes. He walked back up the alley toward the contractor's lot. He was gone 8 minutes. When he came back, he had Walt Briggs with him. Walt was still holding his coffee cup. He looked like a man who had been found and brought somewhere he wasn't sure he wanted to be. Walt stopped in front of Captain. He looked at the horse. He had not looked at him since 5 in the morning. The man in the Stetson stopped beside him. He looked at Walt. "What do you want for him?" Walt looked at him. "Sir, he's got a bowed tendon and a bad shoulder. He can't work anymore." "I didn't ask what he can do. I asked what you want for him." Walt looked at Captain for a long moment. Captain stood in the alley with his lead rope slack, looking at nothing in particular, the way horses look when they are resting. His left foreleg was cocked slightly, taking the weight off it. "Mister," Walt said, "he's got maybe 2-3 good years left if he's kept right. Light work only, good pasture, someone who knows horses." He shook his head. "I can't sell him to just anybody and feel right about it." The man in the Stetson looked at him. "I've got a ranch in Encino, 12 horses, 3 of them retired working horses." He looked at Walt steadily. "I know what I'm doing." Walt looked at him for a long time. He looked at him the way a man looks at someone he is deciding whether to trust with something that matters. Then he looked at Captain again. $50, Walt said, "and you send me word when he goes. I want to know." The man reached into his jacket pocket and produced a wallet. He took out $50 and held it out. Walt did not take it immediately. He looked at the money. He looked at Captain. He folded his coffee cup hand against his side. "He fought in Korea," Walt said. "My boy. He didn't come back. He bought me this horse with his first rodeo check in 1947, the week before he shipped out. Said it was an investment in the business. He was 22 years old." Walt's voice had not changed in register or volume. He said it the way a man says a thing he has said in his own head many times and has learned to say without breaking. "Captain's the last thing I've got from that year." The alley was very quiet. The fairgrounds were beginning to wake up in the distance, a loudspeaker testing, the sound of a tractor somewhere, a horse calling from the far end of the pens. The man in the Stetson did not say anything for a moment. He looked at Captain. He looked at the blaze on the horse's face and the 3 white stockings and the slightly cocked left foreleg. Then he held out the $50 again. "He'll have good pasture and light work and the best care I can give him," he said, "and I'll send word." Walt took the money. He folded it once and put it in his shirt pocket without looking at it. He put his hand on Captain's neck for a moment, flat, still, the same way the man in the Stetson had done. Then he took his hand off and turned and walked back up the alley toward the contractor's lot without looking back. The man at the gate with the veterinarian's bag had been watching all of this. He put the bolt gun back in his bag. He signed the release form on his clipboard and handed it to Clyde and walked away. Clyde Rudd stood in the alley with Captain's lead rope in his hand. He looked at the man in the Stetson. "Where do you want him, sir?" "I've got a trailer at the north lot." He reached over and took the lead rope from Clyde. "I'll take him from here." He led Captain back up the alley. The horse walked beside him, the way he had walked every alley in 11 years, steady and unhurried, trusting the man on the lead rope. Captain spent the rest of his life at the ranch in Encino. He had a pasture with 3 other retired horses, and light work when he was up for it, and the best farrier in Los Angeles County on a regular schedule. The left tendon was treated by a veterinarian who specialized in equine rehabilitation. It never fully healed, but it stabilized, and Captain was comfortable in his last years, and that was what mattered. He died in the spring of 1961, at the age of 22. He went down in the pasture on a Tuesday morning in April, quietly, in the sun. The ranch hand who found him said he looked like he had simply decided to lie down and had not gotten back up. That was how honest horses went when they were lucky. John Wayne sent word to Walt Briggs the following week. A short letter, 2 sentences, written on plain paper. Captain died April 4th in the pasture at Encino. He went easy, and he was not alone. Walt Briggs received the letter on a Friday. He read it at the kitchen table in his house outside Cheyenne. He read it twice. He folded it and put it in the drawer of the kitchen table where he kept the things that mattered, and did not take it out again for a long time. Walt Briggs died in 1968. His daughter cleaned out the kitchen drawer and found the letter. She did not know the story behind it. She put it in a box with the other papers from the drawer, and the box went into storage. 20 years later, going through her father's things, she found the letter again and read it, and this time she knew the handwriting, and she understood what she was holding. The letter is framed now, in her house in Laramie, on the wall beside the kitchen window. 2 sentences on plain paper in a plain frame. Outside the window, the Wyoming plains run flat and wide to the horizon, the way they always have. The afternoon light comes through that window every day and crosses the frame for a while. Then it moves on. The plains stay exactly as they are. If this story reached you, do me a favor. Pass it on. Share it with someone who has ever loved a good horse. There are more stories coming. Clyde Rudd worked for Walt Briggs for 6 more years after that July morning. He left the stock contracting business in 1962 and bought a small place outside Wheatland and ran a few horses of his own. He told the story of that morning in the alley at Frontier Days every year or two, usually in the fall when the rodeo circuit wound down, and the men who worked the circuit gathered in the bars in Cheyenne and Laramie and Miles City and talked about the seasons behind them and the seasons ahead. He told it the same way every time, without embellishment, the way men who have witnessed something real tell a true story. He said the thing he remembered most was not the moment the man in the Stetson stopped him in the alley. It was the moment Walt Briggs put his hand on Captain's neck one last time before he walked away. Clyde said he had handled horses his whole life, and he had seen men say goodbye to horses many times, and he had never seen it done more quietly or more finally than that. He also said that after Walt walked away and the man at the gate put his bag away and left, the alley was suddenly very still. Just him and Captain and the man in the Stetson standing in the early morning light with the fairgrounds beginning to wake up around them. And he said Captain stood there in the alley with his lead rope slack and turned his head and looked at the man in the Stetson for a long moment. Not the way horses look at strangers, the other way. Clyde said he had thought about that look many times over the years. He could not explain it exactly. He just said, the horse knew. Walt Briggs kept one photograph of Captain his whole life. It is a black and white photograph taken at the Calgary Stampede in 1952, showing Captain at full gallop in the arena, rider up, all 4 hooves off the ground. It is a good photograph. The blaze on Captain's face is clearly visible, and so are the 3 white stockings, and the way he carries himself in full stride, level and powerful and honest, the way honest horses run when they are running for the pleasure of it. The photograph was in the kitchen drawer with the letter. Walt's daughter framed it with the letter when she finally understood the story. 2 items in the same frame. The photograph on the left, the letter on the right. The same arrangement Edna Marsh used for the bronze star and the tax receipt, though neither family ever knew about the other. It hangs in her kitchen in Laramie on the wall beside the window. When people ask about it, she tells them the story. It takes a while to tell properly. She tells it anyway. She says it is the only story she knows that ends with a horse lying down in the sun in a California pasture in April, and a letter arriving in Wyoming the following week, 2 sentences on plain paper, and a man reading those 2 sentences at a kitchen table, and folding the letter and putting it away in a drawer where the things that mattered were kept. She says, you don't forget a story like that. Once you know it, you just don't. The Frontier Days Rodeo in Cheyenne still runs every July. The back pens behind the main arena are still there, the narrow dirt alleys between the stock enclosures, the same layout they have always had. In July, the dust comes up fine and pale in the morning light, and the smell of the place is the same smell it has always been, livestock and leather and the particular dry heat of Wyoming summer. Nobody at the rodeo today knows about the morning of July 17th, 1956. There is no marker in the alley. There is no placard beside the back fence rail where a man once set a coffee cup down and came off the fence and asked a single question. The alley looks like every other alley in every other stock facility in the American West. Dirt and fence rail and the sound of horses in the early morning. But every July when the light comes up over the Laramie Range and the first horses move through those alleys in the blue hour before the crowds arrive, there is a moment when the place is very still. Just the horses and the dust and the flat Wyoming sky. And somewhere in that stillness, if you know the story, you can almost hear the sound of a lead rope going slack and a horse turning his head to look at a stranger, the way horses look when they have decided to trust. Clyde Rudd said, "The horse knew." Maybe he did. Honest horses usually do.